My daughter and her husband called my new boyfriend a nobody at my birthday party. A retired librarian living off his pension, they said. In front of 50 guests, they claimed he was only after my money. My daughter stood beside him, arms crossed, silent. I wanted to disappear. Then a woman I didn't know stood up. "Do you know who this man is?" she asked. What she said next silenced the entire room. But first, do me a favor. Drop your name in the comments. Channel subscribers appear as characters in my stories, so don't miss out. My name is Winifred Chen, though most people call me Winnie. I am 71 years old, and 42 years I taught high school chemistry in Boston. I retired 3 years ago with a modest pension and a small house in the suburbs. And 6 months ago, after 20 years of being alone, I fell in love again. My husband Robert died 20 years ago from a sudden heart attack. He was only 48 years old, and I was 51 at the time. Our daughter Brooke was just 17, about to graduate from high school. I remember the night Robert died like it was yesterday, even though 2 decades have passed. We were in the hospital, and the machines were beeping steadily beside his bed. Robert held my hand with what little strength he had left and whispered something I would never forget. "Take care of Brooke," he said, his voice barely audible above the sound of the monitors. "Promise me you'll always put her first." I promised him that night, and for 20 years I kept that promise with everything I had. I poured my entire life into being the best mother I could possibly be. I worked extra shifts at the school tope for Brooke's college tuition at Boston University. I drove her to every event, every job interview, every milestone in her life without complaint. I attended every graduation, every promotion celebration, every moment that mattered to her. But somewhere along the way, in all those years of being a mother and a teacher and a widow, I forgot something important. I forgot that I was also a woman who deserved to be loved and cherished. After Robert died, I told myself I would never love anyone else again. It felt like a betrayal to his memory, like I was trying to erase him from my life. So I stayed alone for 20 years, eating dinner by myself every night at a table set for one. I slept in a bed that felt too big and too empty, with only his photograph on the nightstand for company. I told myself this was enough, that being a good mother was all the purpose I needed. Then I met Henrik Larsen on a Thursday morning in June, and everything changed. I was at the local library looking for a book on organic chemistry, because old habits die hard. Even though I had retired from teaching, I still loved reading about molecules and chemical reactions. A tall man with silver hair was standing in the science section, holding a book about immunology. His glasses were slightly crooked on his nose, and his sweater had a small hole near the elbow. He looked like someone who forgot to at lunch because he was too absorbed in his thoughts. I said something to him, though I cannot even remember what it was now. Something mundane about the book he was holding or the weather outside. He smiled at me, and we started talking right there in the middle of the library. We talked for an hour, then another, until the librarian politely told us they were closing for the day. We moved to a coffee shop across the street and continued our conversation until the sun went down. His name was Henrik Larsen, and he told me he was a retired librarian who had worked at a university library for decades. Now he volunteered at the local branch, shelving books and helping students with their research projects. I told him I was a retired chemistry teacher, and he immediately started asking me questions about covalent bonds. I explained the concept to him, expecting his eyes to glaze over the way most people's did. But Henrik asked follow-up questions that showed he actually understood what I was saying. He wanted to know about electron sharing and molecular stability and the beauty of chemical reactions. That was when I knew he was someone special, someone different from anyone I had met in a long time. Most people stopped listening after the first sentence when I talked about chemistry. But Henrik made me feel like what I loved mattered, like my knowledge and passion were valuable. He made me feel like I mattered, not just as someone's mother or someone's teacher, but as myself. We started meeting every Thursday at the library, then every Tuesday and Thursday as well. Before I knew it, we were seeing each other almost every day, and I found myself looking forward to those meetings. Henrik lived in a small apartment on the edge of town in a building that had seen better days. He drove an old Volvo that made concerning noises whenever it turned corners or accelerated too quickly. His clothes were simple and well-worn, nothing expensive or flashy about him at all. He wore button-down shirts with frayed collars, wool sweaters that had been mended multiple times, and sensible shoes. But when Henrik looked at me, I felt like the most valuable woman in the entire universe. He opened doors for me and asked about my day, then actually listened to my answers with genuine interest. He remembered small details, like how I took my coffee with 1 sugar and cream. He knew which flowers I liked and which books I was reading and what made me laugh. One evening in late summer, we were walking through the park near my house, watching the leaves turn gold and red. Henrik stopped suddenly and took my hand in both of his, looking at me with an expression I had not seen in 20 years. "Winnie," he said softly, "I know we have not known each other for very long, but I want you to know that these past few months have been the happiest of my entire life." I felt tears sting my eyes as I realized I felt exactly the same way about him. "Mine too," I whispered, barely able to get the words out past the lump in my throat. He kissed my forehead, and it was gentle and respectful and full of warmth. At 71 years old, after 2 decades of believing that part of my life was over forever, I felt like a teenager again. My daughter Brooke did not approve of my relationship with Henrik from the very beginning. Brooke is 41 years old now and works as a marketing manager at a pharmaceutical company called Medcore Industries. She has a good salary, a nice house in an expensive suburb, and 2 German cars sitting in her garage. Her husband Preston is even worse than she is when it comes to materialism and status. He is 44 years old and works as vice president of strategic partnerships at the same pharmaceutical company where Brooke works. Preston talks about money constantly, in every conversation we have without fail. He discusses his net worth, his stock options, his investment portfolio, and the value of his real estate holdings. Every single conversation eventually becomes about how much things cost and how much money he makes. The first time I mentioned Henrik to Brooke over the phone, I could hear her entire demeanor change immediately. "What does he do for a living, Mom?" she asked, and there was something sharp in her voice. I told her that Henrik was retired and used to work at a university library for many years. There was a long, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line that stretched out for several seconds. Then she said, "Mom, are you absolutely sure about this man?" I told her I was sure, more sure than I had been about anything in a very long time. December came around, bringing my 71st birthday with it, and I decided to have a party at my house. I invited 50 guests, including former colleagues from the high school where I taught chemistry for 4 decades. I also invited neighbors from my street, friends from my church, and of course, my daughter and her husband. Brooke insisted on inviting several of her coworkers from Medcore Industries to the party as well. She also wanted to bring some of Preston's coworkers, including the CEO of the entire company. "Mom, this is really important for Preston's career advancement," she told me over the phone. "Please don't do anything to embarrass us in front of his colleagues, and especially not in front of his boss." I felt a knot form in my stomach when she said that, but I agreed to let her invite whoever she wanted. After all, it was my birthday party, and I wanted my daughter to be happy and comfortable there. Most importantly, I wanted to introduce Henrik to everyone who mattered in my life. I wanted them to see what I saw when I looked at him every day. I wanted them to meet this kind, brilliant, gentle man who had made me feel alive again. The day of the party, I woke up early, feeling more nervous than I had on my first day of teaching. I spent hours cleaning my house and arranging flowers and making sure everything was perfect for the celebration. Henrik arrived 2 hours before the guests were expected, wearing his best suit that was clean and pressed, but clearly old. He brought me a single rose from his garden. Not an expensive bouquet from a florist, but something he had grown himself. "Happy birthday, Winnie," he said with that gentle smile I had come to love so much. "Thank you for letting me be part of your special day." The guests started arriving around 3 in the afternoon, and at first, everything went beautifully. My former teaching colleagues hugged me warmly and admired Henrik, asking him thoughtful questions about his work at the library. He talked to them about education, about the importance of public libraries, and about helping students with research. They liked him immediately, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I watched them laugh together. My neighbors and church friends were equally warm, welcoming Henrik into their conversations with genuine kindness. Then Brooke and Preston arrived, and I watched the atmosphere in the room shift in an instant. Brooke was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my entire monthly pension check. Preston had a watch on his wrist that could have easily paid for a decent used car. They walked through my front door and immediately scanned the room like they were assessing property values. I could see them taking note of who was there, categorizing people by their apparent wealth and status. I walked over to them with Henrik beside me, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. "Everyone," I said, raising my voices slightly to get the attention of the room, "I would like you all to meet my boyfriend, Henrik Larsen." Henrik smiled warmly and extended his hand toward Preston in a gesture of friendly greeting. Preston looked at Henrik's outstretched hand for a long moment, then deliberately kept his own hands in his pockets. "So, Henrik," Preston said with a smirk that made my stomach turn, "what exactly do you do for a living?" Henrik's smile did not falter as he withdrew his hand and answered calmly, "I am retired now, but I used to work at the university library for many years." Preston let out a loud, theatrical laugh that made several people in the room turn to look at us. "A librarian?" he said, pronouncing the word like it was something dirty or shameful. "Do people even still read actual books these days? Or has everyone moved on to e-readers?" Some of Preston's colleagues who were standing nearby laughed along with him, though not all of them seemed comfortable. I felt my face start to burn with humiliation, but I forced myself to stand there and not react. Brooke suddenly grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the group toward the kitchen. "Mom," she said once we were alone, closing the kitchen door behind us with more force than necessary, "what on earth are you thinking bringing this man into your life?" I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady as I answered her. "I am thinking that Henrik is a good man, who makes me happy, for the first time in 20 years. Brooke shook her head like I was a child who did not understand something obvious. "He is a librarian, Mom. A retired librarian with probably nothing but a tiny pension to live on." I felt anger start to rise in my chest, mixing with the hurt and confusion I was already feeling. "He has a pension just like I do, Brooke. We are both comfortable and independent." She made a dismissive gesture with her hand that reminded me uncomfortably of her husband. "Comfortable?" she said, her voice ripping with contempt. "Mom, Preston's boss is here tonight. The CEO of Medcore Industries is in your living room right now. Do you have any idea how important this evening is for Preston's career advancement? And you bring this person, this nobody with no money and no status, and expect us to just accept it?" I felt something inside me crack when she called Henrik a nobody. "This person," I said, and my voice was shaking now despite my efforts to control it. "This person is the man I love, Brooke. I have been alone for 20 years. 20 years of sleeping in an empty bed and eating dinner by myself and having no one to talk to. And now I have finally found someone who makes me feel like living again. Is that really not enough for you to be happy for me?" Brooke did not answer my question. She just looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. It might have been pity, or it might have been contempt, and I honestly could not tell the difference anymore. We went back to the living room where Preston was now standing in the center of a large group of guests. Henrik was off to the side, talking quietly to one of my former teaching colleagues about a book they had both read. Preston raised his voice to make sure everyone in the room could hear what he was about to say. "Hey everyone," he called out. I want you all to meet Winnie's new boyfriend properly. This is Henrik the librarian, the man who has captured my mother-in-law's heart in her golden years. He paused dramatically, and I could see the cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Tell me, Henrik, Preston continued, his voice dripping with false concern. Do you happen to know exactly how much Winnie's pension is every month? Is that perhaps one of the reasons you are so interested in dating a woman her age? The entire room went completely silent, and I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Every single person there heard what he said, and they were all staring at us. I wanted to disappear, to run out of my own house and never come back to face any of them. Henrik remained completely calm, his expression unchanged as he responded to Preston's accusation. I do not know what Winnie's pension is, he said evenly, because we do not discuss money. I am with Winnie because I love her for who she is, not for what she has. Preston laughed again, louder this time, and the sound cut through me like a knife. Love, he said mockingly, at your age? That is absolutely adorable, really it is. Ladies and gentlemen, headdressed the entire room now, this is the man my mother-in-law has chosen. An unemployed librarian living off whatever tiny pension he managed to save. He is probably hoping to get his hands on her money, her house, whatever she has left after all these years. A few of Preston's colleagues laughed uncomfortably, and I noticed that Brooke was standing there with her arms crossed. She was not stopping him, not defending me or Henrik, just watching the whole humiliating scene unfold. I felt hot tears starting to form in my eyes, and I knew I was about to cry in front of everyone. 20 years of loneliness had nothing as much as this moment, not even close. Then something happened that I will never forget for the rest of my life. A woman who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the room stood up. I did not know her very well because she was one of Preston's colleagues, someone from his company. She was African American, elegant, maybe around 50 years old, and she had been silent all evening. Henrik, she said, and her voice cut through the awkward laughter like a blade. Henrik Larsen? Henrik turned toward her, and I saw something change in his expression immediately. There was recognition there, and something else that I could not quite identify. Hello, Amara, he said quietly, and there was a note of resignation in his voice. The woman walked toward us, her heels clicking sharply on my hardwood floor. The entire room was completely silent now, every eye fixed on what was happening. Do you know who this man is? She asked, and she was not asking Henrik. She was asking everyone else in the room, including Preston and Brooke. Nobody answered her question, and Preston was starting to look uncertain for the first time. This is Dr. Henrik Larsen, she continued, her voice clear and strong. He is Professor Emeritus of Immunology at Harvard Medical School. He is one of the leading researchers in therapeutic antibody development in the entire world. His work on immune response mechanisms has been cited over 10,000 times in scientific literature. He developed treatments that are currently saving lives in hospitals across this country and around the world. He is one of the most respected scientists in our entire industry. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room as everyone processed what she had just said. Preston's face had gone completely white, and Brooke's mouth was hanging open in shock. The woman was not finished speaking yet, and what she said next made everything even worse for them. I am Dr. Amara Okafor, she said, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Medcore Industries. Dr. Larsen's research team has been in contract negotiations with my company for the past 18 months. We are discussing a partnership worth $300 million for the development of his latest therapeutic antibody. Preston, she turned to look directly at my son-in-law, you are the vice president in charge of that negotiation. Or rather, you were in charge of it until approximately 30 seconds ago. Preston opened his mouth, but no words came out, and I watched him struggle to form a response. Dr. Okafor turned back to me with a warm smile that was completely different from the stern expressions he had worn. "Mrs. Chen," she said gently, "you have excellent taste in men. Dr. Larsen is not only one of the most brilliant scientists I have ever had the privilege of working with, he is also one of the most humble and decent people I have ever met in my entire life. I am truly honored to be in his presence here today at your birthday celebration." I looked at Henrik, who was watching me with an expression that was gentle and apologetic at the same time. "I did not want you to know," he said quietly, so only I could hear him. "I wanted you to love Henrik, just Henrik the man, not Dr. Larsen the scientist or the professor. I wanted to be sure that you loved me for who I am, not for what I have accomplished or what people say about me." My eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears now. Not tears of humiliation, but of something else entirely. "I did," I whispered back to him. "I do love you, Henrik. Just you." The party continued after that, but everything had completely changed in the span of a few minutes. Guests surrounded Henrik, asking him questions about his research and his work and his career. My former teaching colleagues were absolutely thrilled when they learned who he really was. One of them told me she had actually used his published papers in her advanced biology class. Another said her son had studied under Henrik at Harvard and spoke of him with enormous respect. Preston and Brooke stood in the corner of the room by themselves, and I noticed that nobody was approaching them. The colleagues who had laughed at Preston's cruel jokes earlier were now keeping their distance from him. Later that evening, I saw Dr. Okafor pull Preston into the hallway for a private conversation. I could not hear what they were saying, but the discussion was brief, and Preston's face was ashen when he returned. The next morning, my phone rang early, and I saw Brooke's name on the screen. "Mom," she said, and I could hear that she had been crying. Preston was fired from his job. They told him his behavior at your party was completely unacceptable and embarrassing to the company. They said he humiliated their most important research partner in front of dozens of witnesses. "Mom, this is your fault. You brought that man into our lives, and now Preston has lost everything." I felt anger surge through me, replacing the sadness I had felt the night before. "My fault?" I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I did not tell Preston to insult Henrik. I did not tell him to mock a man he knew absolutely nothing about in front of 50 people. I did not tell him to accuse Henrik of being a gold digger who was only interested in my pension. Preston did all of that himself, Brooke. Those were his choices and his words, not mine." There was silence on the other end of the line for several long seconds. "But you brought him," Brooke said, her voice breaking. "You brought that man into our lives and ruined everything." I took a deep breath before responding, choosing my words carefully. "That man is going to be my husband," I said quietly. "And if you cannot accept that and be happy for me, then I honestly do not know what else to say to you." I hung up the phone before she could respond, and I sat there in my kitchen shaking with emotion. 3 months passed, and I heard through mutual friends that Preston still could not find work anywhere. The story of what happened at my birthday party had spread throughout the entire pharmaceutical industry. People were calling it the incident, where a VP insulted a Nobel-nominated scientist and got fired for his arrogance. No company wanted to hire someone with that kind of reputation for poor judgment and cruelty. Brooke's position at MedCore Industries became increasingly difficult as well during those months. She was still the wife of the man who had publicly humiliated Dr. Henrik Larsen in front of witnesses. Colleagues began to avoid her in the hallways, and she found herself excluded from important projects. The promotion she had been working toward for 2 years suddenly evaporated without explanation. She made things worse by posting on Facebook that her mother was being taken advantage of by a con artist. Henrik's former students, who were now doctors and researchers all around the world, saw her post and responded. They flooded her comment section with defenses of Henrik and criticism of her behavior. One of them wrote that calling Dr. Larsen a con artist was like calling Einstein a high school dropout. Brooke deleted the post within hours, but screenshots had already been taken and shared widely. 6 months after my birthday party, there was a knock on my door early one morning. I opened it to find Brooke standing there alone, without Preston anywhere in sight. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, and her expensive designer clothes had been replaced with simple jeans and a sweater. She looked like my daughter again, the way she had looked before money and status had consumed her life. "Mom," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Can we please talk?" We sat in my living room, which was now part of the small house by the ocean that Henrik had bought for us. Henrik was at the university consulting on a research project, so it was just the two of us. "I was wrong," Brooke said, and tears started streaming down her face. "I was completely and totally wrong about everything. I was wrong about Henrik. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about what matters in life. I was scared, Mom. After Dad died, you were alone for so long, and I thought I was the only one you had left. When Henrik appeared, I felt like I was losing you, like I was being replaced. So I tried to push him away by convincing myself he was not good enough for you. But really, I was just afraid of not being the most important person in your life anymore." I reached across and took her hand, feeling my own tears start to fall. "You could never be replaced, Brooke," I said gently. "You are my daughter, and that will never change, no matter what." She nodded, squeezing my hand tightly. "I know that now, but I did not understand it then. I hurt you so badly, and I hurt Henrik, and I destroyed my own marriage because of my terrible pride. Preston and I are separated now. He moved back in with his parents, and we are filing for divorce." We sat in silence for a while, just holding hands the way we used to when she was a little girl. "Can you ever forgive me, Mom?" she finally asked, looking at me with red, swollen eyes. I thought about the party, about the humiliation, about the weeks of painful silence between us. I thought about 20 years of loneliness and about Henrik, who had loved me without knowing about my pension or my house. Henrik had loved me simply because I could explain covalent bonds and because I made him laugh. "I can try," I said honestly. "It will take time, but I can try to forgive you, Brooke." 1 year after that terrible birthday party, Henrik and I got married in a small ceremony at a church by the ocean. There were only 30 guests, including my teaching colleagues, Henrik's research colleagues, and several of his former students. And Brooke was there too, standing in the front row, holding a bouquet of flowers and crying openly. During the reception, Brooke stood up and gave a toast that silenced the entire room. "A year ago," she said, her voice shaking, "I made the worst mistake of my entire life. I judged a man by his clothes, his car, and his job title, without ever trying to know who he really was. I almost destroyed my relationship with my mother, the person who sacrificed everything for me. But Mom and Henrik taught me the most important lesson I have ever learned in my life. Love is not about status or money or what other people think of you. Love is about seeing someone for who they truly are and valuing them for their character. I am so grateful that they gave me another chance to be part of their lives." Henrik squeezed my hand under the table as everyone applauded Brooke's words. Later that night, we stood on the balcony of our house overlooking the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore below us, and stars filled the sky above. Henrik had bought this house not to show off his wealth, but because he knew I had always dreamed of waking up to the sound of the ocean. "Are you happy, Winnie?" he asked, putting his arm around my shoulders. I looked at him, at this man who had pretended to be a simple librarian, just so he could be loved for himself. This man who had endured public humiliation with grace and dignity. This man who had given me a second chance at life when I thought my life was already over. "I have never been happier in my entire life," I said, and I meant every single word. He smiled and kissed my forehead the way he had that first evening in the park. The waves kept crashing below us, and the stars kept shining above us. And I knew, at 72 years old, that my life was not ending, but finally, truly beginning. My daughter and her husband insulted my new boyfriend at my party. When the nobody introduced himself, their world collapsed. But mine finally began. If this story touched your heart, I would really appreciate it if you could hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. And I am curious, if you were in my situation, how would you have handled it differently? Have you ever experienced something similar in your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below because I love reading your stories.